Welcome to Global View. Today we have an incredible guest, widely known as the legendary wrestling icon Kane and the mayor of Knox County, Tennessee. Thanks for joining us, Mayor Glenn Jacobs.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, from the wrestling ring to the political arena, you bring a unique perspective into leadership, freedom, and the challenges facing America today. But before getting into politics, I would like to walk these years when you became an absolute icon of American culture through your outstanding wrestling career. And this show is not simply about politics, it's about politics and culture. And you seem to be the perfect match for it. Can you walk us back through this magic time?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the compliments. I always want to play professional sports ever since I was a little kid, and unfortunately, maybe fortunately, looking back on it, actually, I suffered a very serious knee injury when I was playing college football, and that was basically the end of my athletic career and my dreams of playing professional sports. But the wonderful thing about America is that the only limitation on how you use your God-given gifts, skills, and abilities is really your imagination and figuring out how you can use what you have, your inherent gifts, to benefit yourself and really to benefit other people. That's the way that you end up benefiting yourself in the market. So for me, one day I was watching pro wrestling on TV, WWF at the time, with a friend of mine, and he said that you might want to try that. And I thought to myself, wow, I'm big like those guys are, still a pretty good athlete despite having the bad knee. My degree is in English, so I know about Shakespeare, which is really what professional wrestling is. So I figured I'd give it a shot, and I was just incredibly fortunate to be very successful in my career, to work with some of the greatest entertainers, and not only in wrestling, but just throughout pop culture. I mean, everybody from Drew Carey to the Muppets to Scooby-Doo. I've been in a Scooby-Doo movie, which is wild to think about. But I was just incredibly fortunate to be in WWE at a time that it was really the hottest thing, not only in wrestling, but in entertainment around the world. So I've just been incredibly blessed.
Absolutely. And, I'll tell you a funny story. I'm Italian, so we used to watch wrestling even over there. But it's only until a few months ago here in America that I found out that this is acting, entertainment. I really thought you guys were for real. So forgive me for
Yeah.
this confession, but, it's just like an incredible show. And I thought you were for real.
Yeah. Well, there are some guys that it's a little more real than others when you get in
Absolutely.
there, but no, it's great entertainment. And it's funny you mentioned Italy. I would have uh, lunch with former Congressman Jimmy Duncan many years ago, and we were just talking about how one day he was in Italy, and there was a poster of WWE and of Kane in Milan or wherever, and he's like, I can't get away from this guy no matter where I go around the world.
That's
So
true.
it's pretty neat just to think about the worldwide, the global reach of WWE. And this might sound crazy, but I always kind of considered us ambassadors to the rest of the world in many different ways,
Mhm.
actually.
Mayor Jacobs, you mentioned your degree and how wrestling was almost like a Shakespearean experience, and you had to be a master orator. How did those skills help you on the campaign trail when you decided to jump into the political ring of fire or the real Royal Rumble of politics? Did you see that help you? Was it beneficial or not?
It was both, actually.
Mhm.
Obviously, the celebrity that comes along with being me helped open the door in a lot of different ways, but I also had to step through that door. And
Mhm.
just being Kane, the professional wrestler, that wasn't for the voters, that wasn't going to be enough, obviously. Um, but I think too that professional wrestling really at its core is about evoking emotion from the audience. It's about participation and the audience feeling what the performers feel, and that's true in politics as well. And when I'm
Mhm.
talking, when I'm writing, I always try to keep that top of mind. Is it's after a few seconds, people are going to tune you out if you aren't talking about the things that they care about, and if they don't feel that you're invested in them. I mean, that's the reason that Donald Trump, in my opinion, has been so successful, because while all these other politicians are spewing whatever, he's actually forming a connection with his, not only I would say his base, but when you look at that base now, he did a remarkable job in 2022 of really bringing in all different sorts of people from different demographics, different ethnicities, even different political beliefs. I mean, you look at his cabinet now, and you have Tulsi Gabbard in his cabinet, former Democrat, and who is awesome, by the way. But nevertheless, that I think that's something that he's been really successful at, is talking to people about the issues that are important to them. And all too often, I think politicians on purpose deliberately talk over people's heads because they really don't want folks to understand what they're really saying.
Well, you walked into the political arena as a superstar, and the school of wrestling, it can be also school of life. How much wrestling is necessary in politics?
It can be definitely a full contact sport, but I think that my political experience in WWE helped me a lot in government politics. Everything we do as human beings, if there's more than one person involved, it's political. I mean, it just is. And what I mean by that is, you have to persuade people that your point of view is correct, or this is the way we need to go. And that was true in WWE as well. So I really believe that your interpersonal relationship skills, your ability to persuade people to make your argument, that's one of the most important things for success in life. And that is something that I learned in WWE. Also in WWE, I always put the organization ahead of myself. I figured if the organization was successful, that I would end up being successful as well. And for the most part, that's what happened. I was talking with a leadership class at a high school today, and that's one of the most important facets of leadership, is understanding it's not about you. It's not about the leader. It's about the organization and the health and the well-being and the progress of the organization. So those are things that I learned in WWE, maybe not in the ring, but certainly backstage and dealing with the political environment there.
The Democrats seem to have Hollywood on their side. They seem to have, big tech in many ways on their side, late night shows, screenwriters. But WWF, WWE, to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, seems to have a more moderate conservative crowd. And it's the biggest entertainment spectacle, professional entertainment spectacle in the entire world. And it just continues to grow and to grow and to grow. We see the ratings, we see the numbers, we see WrestleMania, we see et cetera, et cetera. So the question I have is, can Republicans or people like President Trump depend on WWE to be their own version of Hollywood in terms of support, mobilizing voters, and being part of mainstream American culture?
Yeah, that's a great question. And certainly when I was there, we all were kind of center right, for the most part anyway. Most of the guys were center right. One of the reasons why is because we were independent contractors, which means that we were responsible for paying our own taxes instead of have withholding taxes. If I were to ever become president, which by the way will never happen, but if I were, first thing I'd suggest is eliminate withholding tax, because then people would realize, oh my gosh, I'm not getting a rebate back or a refund from the government. I actually paid all this money in, and what are they doing with that money? And that was actually one of the things that kind of propelled me to where I am politically. Is, you see all the things going on, and this is before Doge, by the way, which is even I am astounded by the waste that Elon Musk and his people have uncovered. So this is even before that, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, these programs, how does this actually benefit the people that are paying for them? So that's, I think, a lot of the reason many of us were where we are. Obviously, it's a different locker room now, and I'm certainly not as in tune as I once was. But I think one of the great things about President Trump is he has the ability to transcend whatever medium he's participating in, whether it was, TV and then reality show. And then he was able, to kind of parlay that into some notoriety going into a presidential election. And, you saw it happen with this election, this campaign, and it was a brilliant tactic. And it was all Barron's idea of going on these long form podcasts and getting away from so much of the politics and into pop culture and into sports. And people could actually see, Donald Trump he's an interesting guy. He's an entertaining guy. He has a very wide breadth of knowledge about these different areas. And it removed that, oh my gosh, orange man bad that the mainstream media is always painting him to be. And you realize he's just a guy. So, I don't know. I can't answer that per se, but I do think that what's happened is there's a shift going on. And you can see it with late night TV. I mean, the Gutfeld show is now the number one rated late night TV show. You see some of these cracks in that monolithic industry that was entertainment. You see things breaking away now. And frankly, that's for their own survival. I think that at some point, the Hollywood folks are going to have to realize, like, the far woke left is not going to pay the bills for them. And they're really going to have to move back towards the center. And then hopefully, too, you'll see more and more of kind of the entertainment on the right come into the mainstream.
You mentioned long form podcasts and entertainment. You had an incredible sit down interview with President Trump yourself with The Undertaker just weeks before. I think it was just weeks before the election. It was incredible. Can you walk us through that experience, sitting down with President Trump for a long form interview, and how do you think that impacted how he was viewed by a massive segment of the population?
Well, I actually didn't get to participate in the podcast itself. That was all Undertaker, and I was there.
You were there.
Afterwards, we filmed a little entertaining bit, but it was neat to be there. What was really fascinating was I told Undertaker, Mark Calloway, afterwards, I was like, you did a great job being interviewed by the president for half an hour, because that's what it turned into with President Trump talking and asking Mark questions about wrestling. And you could see that he was genuinely interested. Now, obviously, Trump knows a little about wrestling himself. I mean, he helped promote some of the early WrestleManias. But nevertheless, I think it was really refreshing in that he didn't come on like your typical politician, just bloviating and, this is just talking and all that self-importance. He was actually interested in the other guy. So I think that, if nothing else, people just saw that this difference between these people, that the media often paints as being, public servants and they're humble and everything, and they're really not, and they get on these shows and it becomes all about them. But also, it just showed his width of knowledge, and in many different areas, I think is really impressive. So I think those really helped him, because look, even if you don't like Donald Trump and his policies, you come away going, man, I like that guy, and I think if nothing else, that came across very, very, very strongly.
Totally agree.
Absolutely. And, I think big part of the culture, American culture today, is shaped by entertainment, even before. And that we have seen in the last years this woke dictatorship taking over, imposing cast directors to cast a certain type of people, and then just to promote certain type of content, even in the movies. This took away from creativity that should be unbiased. And in my view, it really took away from the scene of Hollywood movies being entertaining or appealing for the most. So we can see today the Hollywood events don't have the same effect. People don't listen to the Hollywood stars. They lost their power. So do you think this is the end of Hollywood, or there is a new venue ahead where entertainment will become, again, some sort of creative space where people will provide content and entertain people in a very genuine and simple way?
I think that it's the latter. I think that this will actually usher in a new era where free speech is back, the ability to explore ideas, returns. And the reason for that is ultimately people want to make money. And what Hollywood has been doing has been turning off just huge segments of the population. I frankly, I'm in politics. Okay. That's what I deal with. But at the same time, I don't want to go to a movie and that is not about politics. If I know I'm getting into it, that's one thing. But if it's a movie about, say, superheroes or something like that, I really don't want to get beat over the head with a political message. And I think actually some of the greatest kind of entertainment. I think of someone like Ayn Rand, who wrote Atlas Shrugged, and all her stuff was, it was very political, but she was able to weave themes in and out while telling a story. So I think we'll see more of that going on in the future. But as you said, one of the worst things was, Hollywood's supposed to be open-minded and they're the rebels, and they became the ultimate conformists. I love Dave Chappelle. He is like the Mark Twain of our era. Well, obviously much more profane, but nevertheless. But he takes, he's not afraid to speak the truth. And what he does is he takes the reality and is able to, to just talk about that in an honest way. And we used to be able to laugh about that. And now it's offensive. And, I don't understand that. I mean, I'm a professional wrestler. Everybody makes fun of me. Okay. I mean, but I'm not offended by it. It's just part of the deal. And I laugh at it myself most times. So this idea that you're going to offend everybody, no matter what you say, it's killing entertainment. It's killing comedy. It's just killing all those things, because ultimately, that's what we look for, is just the ability to sometimes to laugh at ourselves. And when we do that too, you can see how ridiculous things are in many cases. So I think just in order to survive, that the entertainment industry is going to have to change and allow different perspectives and viewpoints.
Growing up, I was a massive fan of the WWF Attitude Era. In fact, I would say it almost created like my persona as a young person: tough, bold, just in your face. And that's kind of almost what gave me courage to get into politics in a way, because that era in American culture, I just think was very politically incorrect, if you want to call it. It was a type of culture that I loved. It was actually what made America really great. It was innovative. It was fresh. And moving into the early 2000s, let's say mid 2000s in WWE, it changed. It went from that very, tough, politically incorrect to more, I guess if you want to call it more scripted, less politically incorrect. So the question I have is, why did that happen? Did it happen because of the same reason that it happened to Hollywood, where Hollywood back in that day was less politically woke to now being extremely political woke? Or was there something else that was happening in the industry at that time?
No, it was actually about trying to appeal to different demographics.
Okay.
Especially moms, basically. The thinking was that it was mom that controlled the remote control on the TV. And that's really also, I think, what led to the women's division as well. And by the way, the women are awesome. They're just they often put on the best matches of the night. They're great. But no, that was actually much more of a market-driven decision than any sort of political decision.
Got it.
You are a fighter for freedom, and you are at the same time still an icon of wrestling pop culture in America. So what are the biggest challenges you faced during your career as a wrestler and during your career as a mayor?
That's a great question. My career in WWE is almost a blur. We were so busy and always getting to the next place. So my biggest challenge was actually just always trying to do the best that I could and keeping my eye on the ball because that could end up being very difficult because you're getting pulled 100 different directions. Remaining grounded. Fortunately, I just kind of have that personality, but I know for a lot of folks, once they start being successful, they kind of forget who they are. And I was very fortunate because that just never happened to me. And just, I'm very very, very blessed because my wife is great. She's strong. And that can be hard as well. I mean, we were gone 250, 300 days a year all the time. So you can imagine how much stress that put on my family. So I was incredibly blessed to have a wonderful family. In politics, it's a lot of the challenges are how do we move things in the right direction? Ideologically, I'm here, but practically, how do we get as close as we can to here? And that can be very difficult. And people on the outside sometimes don't understand that. It's like, well, why are you doing this? Well, if I do this, I get a chance to do this, which is a lot more important. But if I don't do this, then I'll never have the chance to do the more important thing. You have to prioritize what is important and also what you can get done. So especially as the executive, it's a little different if you're in the legislature, because in that case, you can just vote no or, move whatever way. As for me, I actually have to make sure that things are getting done. So that can be a bit of a challenge, especially, when you have the folks out there, who for the most part are your friends and supporters, but they're wondering, oh, why do you move faster on this? Or why did you do that? Trust me, if we were in this world, I would, but we're not. We're in this world. One of the great things, though, with President Trump back in office is this first month has been amazing. And, he has literally moved from this world and taken a lot of things into a much better place. And what that does for someone like me is, it's awesome, because now it's like all these things that I talk about are becoming reality, and so I've always tried to be as bold as I can, but now it just feels like I can actually be bold with a purpose and actually move the needle on some things that otherwise I wouldn't have been able to.
So I want to ask you then a political question based on what you just said locally in Tennessee. When you were campaigning, were you a MAGA candidate? Were you an America First candidate? Were you somewhere in between? Were you your own political kind of animal? So that's the first question. And secondly, in your district, you are the executive.
Yes.
You have a very powerful role in a very important state. Do your constituents view America First as the future of the Republican Party, or do you think it's going to have to moderate to some extent and go back a little bit to the W days, Reagan-esque? Or, in my opinion, I'm MAGA all the way. I'm America First all the way. I've been since 2015, and I think it's the future. But as an executive, what are the people telling you? How are they presenting this case to you?
Sure. So I won office the first time in 2018. I would consider myself kind of my own at that point, because that was really before those terms took off. I will say that a lot of the reason that I decided to run for office was because Donald Trump became successful. And I figured if Donald Trump could be president, I can run for mayor. And then, see a lot of the things that he was dealing with in that first term, but when you fast forward to this election cycle, it was just completely different this time. With all the threats that he was under, with everything that he went through, he was impeached, he was indicted, he was shot, and he's still standing there. To me, that was just amazing. I've always liked Trump, but this election, I was like, if America has a chance to survive and thrive, it's going to be Donald Trump that does it. And I think we're seeing that after the first month in office. Here in Tennessee, we're going to be MAGA and America First. You still have, kind of the good folks, but those kind of moderate folks that harken back to the days of Howard Baker, who was a big name here in Tennessee. Senator Baker was great. He was able to work on a lot of bipartisan issues and be successful with those. The landscape has just changed, and it is no longer that being able to reach across the aisle, because the folks on the other side of the aisle don't want what we want. I want, I want America to be the best place it can possibly be. I believe that we do that by embracing the American dream. America first. We should look out for our interests before we look out for the rest of the world. Again, I'm big in free enterprise system, individual liberty, the Constitution. Those are really important to me. I don't think that a lot of people on the other side believe that. And I think that they are straight up socialists who would love to see a socialist utopia imposed on the United States. So I don't know. It's very unfortunate, but I don't know how you can reach across the aisle when you're reaching across such a huge gulf. I wish it were possible. I wish that the Democrats, and I think they need to, if that party is going to survive, they have to figure some things out, and they cannot be, this crazy woke, just driven by the far, far left. But right now, that's just that just ain't going to happen. And I think, for me, it was the Bush years that actually kind of drove me away from the Republican Party for a while, because I'm looking at the Republican Party thinking, how's this much different from the Democrats? They're both into wars overseas. They're both huge spenders, and Trump came along, and now his, 2016, you could see it. I mean, the establishment candidates were obviously America preferred the anti-establishment candidate, Donald Trump. Well, then fast forward to 2022, and it's been overwhelming. So I think what's happening is I think a lot of the political people probably are still in that mold of, the George W. Bush days. But I think the average person out there, the average voter, is very much behind Donald Trump, is very much behind the MAGA movement, and very much America first.
It's completely true. And also we come from a very dark years from under Biden presidency. We don't see only wokeism taking over, but we have seen weaponization of the Department of Justice and censorship. So many conservative in America today feels that their freedom were under threat. What would you suggest to do in the future to retrieve trust in institutions and also to restore freedom of speech?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. I don't think that it's a feeling. I think it's true. One of the worst things that happened during the Biden era was the weaponization of the Department of Justice. I mean, look, the system's never going to be perfect, but when it becomes political, we're in big trouble. And I mean, we were on a rocket sled towards a banana republic, just were. So it's wonderful to see some of the changes that President Trump has implemented there. I think ultimately the way that we prevent this in the future is the deep state has to be torn out root and branch.
Yes.
People think that the elected officials are the ones running the show in Washington. In many cases, they're not. It's unelected bureaucrats who have been there forever. We talk about the deep state, that really I'm referring to the intelligence complex. However, it applies just to this bureaucratic edifice that's been built up over the years. It's amazing now you have people throwing a fit because some of these folks are losing their jobs. Well, I mean, in the private sector, what happens if your job is no longer relevant or you're not doing a good job? That job is either eliminated or you're removed from that position. So I think that President Trump is doing the right thing, and I think he needs to be as aggressive as possible, because ultimately what will happen is you'll start losing momentum. The coalition he's built, at some point it's going to fracture. That's just how these things always work. I wish it wasn't, but the pendulum will swing. So let's gain as much ground as we possibly can. But I think reining in, and you have the REINS Act, which Senator Lee talks a lot about. I would love to see that come to pass. But reining in that administrative state, reining in all this bureaucracy and downsizing that as much as possible so that it can't take on a life of its own, I think is what needs to happen.
Mr. Mayor, on your X handle, and I'm paraphrasing, maybe I'm giving a direct quote, it says, "I used to beat people up. Now I'm interested in protecting their freedoms." So you kind of just gave a really great overview of the threats to freedom at the national level, even at the local, state level. So as an executive, in your state, how are you protecting your constituents' freedoms and from the overreaching arm of the government and of this deep state?
Yeah, it's really interesting here. I think, oh, we're in a good place, and I'm almost like, well, we don't really do a whole lot, and it's because we don't do a whole lot. We try not to micromanage the lives of the people who live in Knox County. I mean, I just don't think that's government's job.
Right.
When I look at our state has done a lot to push back, especially in the Biden years. We had the best COVID omnibus bill in the country, basically saying what happened in COVID was not going to happen again as far as government overreach. I was one of the loudest voices during COVID among elected officials, and one of the earliest too, saying that this is just not right what we're doing. I mean, the Constitution does not have an escape clause. Okay, it always applies no matter what, even in health emergencies. And then some of the other things that we just implemented school choice here in Tennessee, which is a great thing. So just a lot of it, especially more at the state level, is pushing back as much as possible, kind of building a firewall around our state. At the same time, this is a lot easier now with Trump in office. I'll give you an example.
Mm-hmm.
When Biden came out with his COVID vax mandate, I wrote him a letter. Obviously, he didn't read it. I don't know if he would remember it if he did. But I wrote a letter saying we're just not going to do that. You're overstepping your bounds here. First of all, that's a legislative decision. Congress has to make that. The president can't. But it also really bothered me. He said it wasn't about freedom. Like, no, dude, in America, it's always about freedom. But there was some at the state level. It's like, well, what do we do here? Do we say that private companies can't make their people take, can't mandate this vax? And a lot of us, and I know at the state level, we're struggling because it's like, well, we don't want to get involved in the affairs of a private business. But at the same time, there was so much pressure coming from Washington, D.C., that at some point, and I agree with this, at some point they had to say, look, you can't make your people do this, okay? And the reason was because of the pressure from Washington, and our legislature felt that they had to protect Tennesseans from government overreach at the federal level. And that was one way to do it. But it kind of sometimes puts you in weird spots because, again, normally there are things that be like, I don't feel comfortable doing that. But at the same time, because the federal government might push so hard on things, we have to, the old saying, interpose ourselves as a state and a locality between the federal government and our people to protect our people and their rights.
That's a very interesting point. And I have two questions in this point. How do you think a local government can effectively push back federal overreach? And do you see yourself going to Congress and try to change things from there at some point?
It's really more at the state level that the pushback can happen. Here at the local level, everything that we do has to comply with state law. So. But if you look at the Constitution, obviously that's the majority of the authority in America belongs to the states. And that's something else that I would really like to see return to a constitutional basis. All these things that the federal government does, for example, the Department of Education, that should have never been created to begin with, and it should be abolished because the word education is not in the Constitution, meaning it's a state issue. And there are many other things that are like that. Those powers need to go back to the states as opposed to the feds with their one-size-fits-all policies imposing themselves on us. During COVID, again, we had a federal judge. Our school board twice voted down mask mandates at our schools. We had a federal judge put an injunction that they had to have mask mandates. So we did everything we could, but unfortunately, they just kind of hold the cards in those situations. So it can be difficult, but it is necessary. One of the things that's really infuriating is how the federal government bribes the states with their own money. If you don't do this, we're going to cut your funding. Well, it's like, where did the money come from to begin with? I mean, yeah, you guys print it and borrow it, but I mean, it's supposed to be the taxpayers' money, right? So you're saying you're going to cut funding with our own money? So, I'd really like to see all those things obviously revisited. I don't know what the future holds for me. Uh, you know, um, the political world and landscape is very fluid and it's always changing. I never wanted to go to Washington because
Don't blame you.
I always felt that the battle was going to be at the state level,
Mhm.
and we would have to build a bulwark or firewall around our state. Um, I feel a little differently now because
Mm.
of Trump and because of everything that he's done. This is really even more so than Reagan. This is the first time in my life where I feel that you have people that are really concerned with cutting government and cutting government waste. What I've seen thus far has been transformational. I mean, it just really has. Could you imagine a few years ago when we'd be talking about all these things that we're currently talking about? So now, if the opportunity were to come up, I'm not saying I would do it, but I would definitely entertain it. A few years ago, I'd have been like, no, there's no way I would ever go to Washington, but we'll see what happens.
No, I think Washington certainly needs patriots like you and fighters like you who are well known, because whether people understand it or not, having name recognition is incredibly important in today's political scene. Having a massive platform the way that you do is incredibly important. And actually being somebody who stands and has values and has stood with the president, especially during the very dark moments that we lived under the Biden administration, to the glory, great days that we have ahead of us during these next 4 years. So that's certainly something I know our viewers will be definitely watching moving forward. I have one last question, Mr. Mayor. You had some incredibly historic matches with people like Mankind and DX and some of these other folks in the late 90s, early 2000s. Who would you say is your biggest competitor today at the state level that you just can't stand as a political opponent, and that you think that you because what I'm getting at is I want our viewers to see what a patriot looks like versus the opposition in the great state of Tennessee, and to make sure that they do support somebody like you.
So when I think of the great opponents, it's the Democrats in Congress right now and
Got it.
everything that they're doing. But here locally, we had I'm sure you all heard the Tennessee Three, who were the state reps who basically held the gallery hostage, or held a session of a General Assembly hostage. And the amazing thing to me about what's happening right now, especially with the Democrats, is like with Doge. Cutting government waste has always been a bipartisan issue before. I mean, Bill Clinton talked about it, Barack Obama talked about it. Now, all of a sudden, because it's Republicans, but specifically Donald Trump doing it, all of a sudden it's a really bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
That boggles my mind. I understand it, but it boggles my mind. And again, I think that that's something to where, and the same thing at the state level. Fortunately, our local people are actually very common sense, and we have some Democrats on our county commission, but they're just interested in the success of Knox County. They're not interested in some of these ideological debates that come up, right? And I wish a lot more Democrats were like that. But right now, they've literally gone off the rails. And it's almost like they're reeling so badly that even things that are beneficial, instead of saying, hey, we can work with you on this, it's like, oh no, this is the worst thing ever. Bernie Sanders, that Elon Musk is having people fired, and that could happen in the private sector. Well, yeah, Bernie, it happens all the time in the private sector. I hate to tell you that. But the fact that, again, you just have all this pushback against ideas that have been around, bipartisan ideas that have been around for decades. It's just again, it just boggles my mind. But at some point, I think that if the Democrats want to survive as a party, they're going to have to get on board with some of this stuff, and they're going to have to quit catering to the far left and actually start talking to mainstream America again.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayer. It was an absolute pleasure to have you as our guest on Global View, where people can follow your work.
So I'm on Twitter. My handle there is @Glenn, Glenn with 2 N's. GLENN, JACOBS TN. So Glenn Jacobs TN. Also, I have a couple Facebook accounts. One is Knox County Mayor Glenn Jacobs, and then I also have Jacobs for Mayor. And then on Instagram is the same as my Twitter account. So that's Glenn Jacobs TN.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
We really did too. Thank you.
We did.